Good morning. Good morning. I'm Susan Smith of Stitched by Susan. Once again today, I'm going to be edged. We're, oh, sorry. So I should introduce this by saying, first off, I'm Susan Smith of Stitched by Susan. Secondly, my husband and I are kind of new to this, and this is just well, I can't say a two-woman production because it's a man and a woman. But anyway, there's just the two of us here. So he's behind the scenes manning all the cameras. And in fact, during the course of this live this morning, he'll be responding to questions and comments as me, as Stitched by Susan. So be aware that's him on that end. Anyway, this morning I'm here for you again, and I am going to stitch out a quilting design in real time. So I'm going to do a whole quilt from beginning to end so that you can see that process. I know when I was a beginner quilter, for all the YouTube instructions and the classes that you go to and everything, I found it difficult to get a sense of just what the process looked like from 10,000 feet, so to speak, because long arm quilting is solitary by nature. You can't take your machine to your retreat and so forth, right? So I hope that this is helpful to some of you to just see a project go from beginning to end. So it won't be particularly instructional. You'll just be watching as I do it, and I'll chat from time to time. Yesterday I did not have a mic on, and so it was kind of noisy whenever I touched things, bumped on the rails and so forth. That noise kind of came through. So today we're going to try it with a little mic. Let us know if that works better. We are new to live streaming like this, and so we're learning as we go. So hopefully today is better than yesterday, and tomorrow will be better than today. So we've got a couple new camera angles going on and things like that. So we welcome your comments about how that comes across to you. And certainly if you have any difficulty with sound or anything like that, let us know. Feel free to type your questions in. I will try. Yes, mark them with a big Q in front of them if you would, so that they catch our eyes quickly. We're going to try and throw them up on the screen so that everyone can see them. And I'll try and answer them throughout the episode, but we likely will not type in answers today, and I'll go back afterwards and type them in so that viewers who come in after the fact and watch can see the answers linked to the actual questions. And in fact, if you want to go back and read them, that will put the answers with the questions. So we'll see how that works today. Yeah, meanwhile, type in where you're from and maybe things like, do you love machine quilting? Do you quilt on a long arm, a mid arm, a domestic? What's your favorite way? Things like that. Sorry, Dave? Okay. Okay. We're just trying to communicate here too between. Yeah, so I'm just going to get my quilt back up here and start loading, and I'll keep chattering a bit while I talk, but I don't want you to get bored just seeing talking. So let's get started. I am such an advocate for free motion and particularly edge-to-edge quilting. And by that I mean quilting without regard to blocks or seams or borders or even thread color changes, but simply laying the same type of quilting texture over an entire quilt top. There are many reasons that I like it, but one of them is it gives me such creative freedom to make the quilting kind of unique to the quilt or to the owner of the quilt, the maker, because I can personalize it a little bit, right? So that is one of the things I love about it. Another is it's economical. It's economical certainly in terms of dollars and cents. There's no need to buy pantographs or digital designs. And also it's economical in terms of time. You'll see as I work today, it doesn't take me very long to load a quilt. And then there's no pre-marking necessary. There's no setting up of repeats or scaling a design to fit my quilt or anything like that. I can just jump right in to quilting. And so I find it very speedy. I will say I do have a tablet-based system on my machine. And we learned something this morning, and I'll give you a free tip, which is always keep a spare power cord. In the course of our loading and unloading yesterday and moving cameras and cables and things, we actually bumped the power cord and bent it in my tablet, and I didn't realize that. So when I got here this morning to start taping, it was Dead, dead, dead. So the moral to this story is keep a spare wire handy. Can I go any more left, Dave? That's about it. Okay, it's perfect. You can see as I'm loading that I do not have to take the time to find the center points of my leaders or of my quilt back. Pulling it on this way works with the straighter grain of the fabric. It is not even necessary to square up the back before you load it. Huge, huge time saver. Hopefully I'm not huffing and puffing into the mic. This is a little bit of a morning workout. And one more tiny one. We're good to go. So Dave, where are we seeing people from?
We have Illinois, we have one from Suncrest, Washington.
Illinois, Washington, that's my home state.
One from Pennsylvania, my hometown.
Oh, there you go. Well, that would be a state. My husband was born in Pennsylvania, so that's his stomping grounds. And I do just float my quilt tops, and by that I mean I don't roll the top on, it just lays on the top and floats over the bar and down. You guys can probably see, if you watched yesterday, we did raise my machine one notch. I recently added a fatigue mat, and it just put me over the top of being too high up and uncomfortable. But I think probably compared to most of you, I have my machine quite high. Like it's actually at my rib cage. But because I do so much edge-to-edge work and not very much ruler work, this suits me. This is much more, or maybe I should say much less fatiguing to not have to bend over it all the time. So today's project is going to be a bit longer than yesterday's. I'm going to do a little more complex pattern. So if you have any friends that you think might be interested in this, take time to invite them. I'm going to be here for, I don't know, more than an hour, less than 2, somewhere in there. And yeah, invite them to stop by if they wish, if you think that this would be of interest to any of your fellow quilters. I mentioned yesterday that just for my, it reduces my incidence of error, I often load quilts sideways, and I always put my top to the left. So if the back is directional, top goes to the left, so that I never inadvertently have the back going one way and the front another way. So you can see I've loaded this one sideways as well. Top is left. That's just my go-to way. And at this point, if my quilt were not flat, if it had any ripples, and that's super common, I would be pinning this and stabilizing it all. But because I have a channel lock on my machine, I generally choose not to pin it just for the time savings. Oh, one moment. We've caught on something here. Did I unplug anything? Shoo, we escaped. Because I have a channel lock and I can lock my horizontal line in place, I will kind of line up my quilt as I go, and I don't have any particular ripples that I need to deal with. If I did, I would kind of be spacing that out with a pin beforehand or with pins. On where, Dave? Sorry? It's on. You want it off. Gotcha. There we go. Hopefully you can see that better. All these little things. We experiment and experiment to try and find the best camera angles we can. Obviously, we're working with such a huge piece of equipment that it can be challenging to get it well lit and on screen for you. And here's where I put my channel lock on. So now it's magnetically held to the rails, my machine is, so I will get a perfectly straight line across the top, and I'll adjust my quilt as I need to keep that edge really straight. So part of the reason I wanted to do these quilting sessions this week is that I am launching an online masterclass in January. So it's a series of 6 modules, each module containing multiple lessons that all have to do with freehand and mostly edge-to-edge quilting. Some of it lends itself to being switched up a little bit to use in your custom work as well. But because the edge-to-edge is what I love, that's kind of my focus, and a lot of my demonstrations in the class are done that way. And so, yeah, this class that I'm launching is designed to kind of get you from fairly beginner to quite confident edge-to-edge quilter. And within the 6 modules, there's about 35 different designs that I teach. In each module, there's an element of what I call theory. So, you know, talking about what makes a good edge-to-edge design and what elements in it you can change to make more graceful, or how that you move smoothly across a quilt top to get even coverage. All those things we talk about lots and lots and lots. So if that is something that interests you, if freehand quilting has kind of been intimidating to you, I invite you to check out my class. Throughout this taping, Dave's got a banner running across the bottom of the screen that links to both the class itself, like to register for it, and also there's a link to the syllabus or the curriculum, and it gives you a breakdown of what's in each module. And included in that class too is interaction. So for the duration of the class and a couple weeks after, so about 8 weeks time, I'll be doing some live interactive sessions, probably on Facebook as well, where students can come and actually be working at their machine and be asking questions at the same time, and I'll be working with them. Also, I will have a couple of what I call office hours, so I'll be in our Facebook group and able to answer any questions. So there's quite a bit of that interaction going on. So it's a bit like getting some private lessons from me for the duration of that while the modules are being released. And then, of course, they're accessible to you forever. So, you know, you don't have to go through them in the 6-week period of time. They're always available to you, just that live interaction. So I just got a new holder at the end, and boy, it's not working. So back to the less favorite way of just 2 clamps at this end. That's always a conundrum to me, is finding the best tools. And I do love, can you see it? I have this system which is I thought was a Red Snapper brand, and I absolutely love this, but I broke one of them, and my replacement is different. But there you go. Okay, we're going to start quilting. I'm odd. I start at the top right-hand corner. You certainly don't need to, but that's just the way I do it. So here we go. So don't forget, you can ask questions at any time. Dave will relay them to me. If necessary, I'll pause and take a minute to talk into the camera and answer them for you. This quilt, by the way, the pattern is called Hocus Pocus. And the fabric, I bet you lots of you will recognize, it's called Hallows Eve. I think I'm saying that right. It's been a very popular Halloween/fall fabric the last year or two. And it's by Fig Tree. I felt myself bump up against my front edge, so I'm just going to advance a wee hair so I can get back around there without a... oh yes, Dave says I have a question. What's the question, Dave? I can't read it from here. Do you recommend starting out with one design and using that exclusively until your comfort level improves? Ooh, good question. Well, I know that Angela Walters once said that she would rather have 9 different variations on a design than know 9 different designs. So I think it's probably a good idea to start out with fewer rather than more. You might get a little bored with one. However, I think it's safe to say that if you use one design for even 2 quilts, you'll pretty much have that committed to your muscle memory. So it's not like you're resigning yourself to months of using the same design by any means. Now, I do not think I would start out with this one that I'm doing today necessarily as your first one. There's certainly easier ones. Although this is not difficult either. A little practice drawing this out on a doodle pad or a whiteboard, and you can soon get the hang of it. Another thing that I love about freehand quilting, though, you know, among the ease of being able to sort of customize it, it's so easy to change up the scale of it. You know, you can do not only smaller and larger, but you can do fatter petals or longer, thinner petals or plumes or whatever you want to call these. There's endless ways that you can change it just a little. It's like handwriting. You can just make it your own. I think what I am going to do here, though, someone was asking yesterday about whether I stitch in constant or regulated mode and what speed I go if I'm in constant. So I'm going to put this on constant or non-regulated, and I'm going to go at speed 55. I actually prefer to stitch without a regulator on when I'm doing edge-to-edge work. So that's what I'm going to do now, and you guys let me know how that is for sound. That seems like it's okay. Hey, Dave? If you have the option of choosing a regulator or not. Just a moment. What, Dave? It's good? Okay. If you have the option of choosing a regulator or not, I strongly recommend sometimes going without it. It is so good for improving your smoothness. And I also think it actually makes it easier to make smooth curves, for example. There's just a tiny bit of drag or hesitation, I think, when you have the stitch regulator on. Now, maybe that's just my machine, but I've heard that from other quilters too. So there is something smooth about this, and there's something sort of mentally about it not revving and slowing down that gets you just kind of into a real smooth rhythm. And this is my preferred way to stitch most edge-to-edge designs. And do it at whatever speed is comfortable for you. Earlier I was stitching, when I had it on regulated, I was doing 12 stitches to the inch. So I'm trying to match that pretty closely with my unregulated stitching now. So I'm curious if there are some watching who are not comfortable freehanding things like this. I wish you would type into the comments, what are some of the hurdles you face? Or maybe what's the one largest hurdle you face? Is it, I don't know what design to choose? Or is it, I can't draw? How could I freehand quilt? What's the thing that's most difficult for you to overcome? And I'll try to address that. Or at least talk about my experience with it. Because I bet you, whatever it is, it's happened to me at some point. I think most quilters progress through the same trial and error and pain of learning and practicing and oopses. So we've all been there at one time or another, right? You can see when I'm at the top edge of my machine, I'm really quilting at arm's length. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world. I think when I do my next pass, I won't advance quite as far. But I really do enjoy having the machine this high. I find it much less fatiguing on my back. This, by the way, I did not mention earlier, is actually my own quilt. I do really endeavor, even though quilting is my day job, I really try to keep time for quilting my own things because I love making quilts and I don't want to give that up just because quilting is also my job. Mind you, you notice I did not get it done in time for Halloween or even Thanksgiving, but hey, it'll be here for next year. That's how I look at it. So I'm stitching now in constant unregulated mode and I am at stitching speed 55. I think most machines measure that the same way. It's basically a percentage of the maximum rate that the machine will go. And I try to find a kind of balance between I could move around the quilt faster sometimes. On the other hand, if there are any, tiny problem areas or some quick thinking I need to do on my feet, this is about my limit for what I can comfortably maintain for the long haul. So for each person, that's a little bit different. And you certainly might want to start a little slower. And if you're doing finer work, such as, bubble fill or something like that, you might want to go much slower. But for me, 55 is the magic number. So while I'm quilting, a huge shout out to my husband here, who, as I mentioned, is the guy behind all the cameras. We have 4 cameras going this morning and 3 monitors. And this is just the sort of thing you cannot do by yourself. You just can't. And certainly I can't. I'm not very technologically advanced. Technologically challenged. Isn't that what they call it? Yeah, that would be me. So I sure appreciate him sitting here through all this quilting and typing in answers to you ladies that have questions and just keeping the whole boat afloat, basically. Also, he and my son were the ones that bent their backs and got my machine raised up a little bit yesterday. If you were watching yesterday, I was very hunched over in the quilting process. And yeah, so they took the time in the afternoon to raise my machine for me, and it feels so much better. And I appreciate it. If anyone's curious, I am quilting on a Gamel. Is it a Classic Plus, Dave? Can you see the label? Pretty comical that I don't exactly know what my machine is. And actually, this one is fairly new to me. At any rate, it's a Gamel 26-inch, and I do have the Elevate on it. It's a Vision. That's what it is. Of course it is. Anyway, when I first began long arm quilting, I'll tell you just a tiny bit of my story. I grew up making quilts the uber traditional way with my mother. You know, we cut things out with a ballpoint pen and cardboard templates and hand quilted everything. And I still enjoy doing that very much. But I found, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, I was really getting into making quilts, and I thought, gee, I just can't make them fast enough. So first off, I went to a couple of machine quilting classes just for the domestic machine and really enjoyed that. That was all well and good. But then I had a friend who invited me to her home, and she has a very, not a commercial size, just a very small, one of the earlier, anyway, long arm machines. And she invited me to come over and quilt a couple of baby quilts on it one afternoon. And I tell you what, by the end of that afternoon, I knew this was the thing I wanted to do. So my first machine, also a Gamel, but it was about 17 years old. And it had stitch regulator and the magnetic channel locks, and that's all it had. And I quilted about 750 quilts on that, and very recently upgraded to this one. And I named the first one Lucy, and this one's going to be Lucy too. She's just Lucy 2.0. A dear friend gave me an I love Lucy sign for my studio. So I have to remain loyal to Lucy. So as soon as I get to the end of this pass here, we'll pause for a few minutes and while I'm advancing and answer some questions and see what your thoughts are about this process.
I thought I could get another row in, but I think not. So I'm just going to travel over to the edge and take my constant speed off, and we'll advance. Okay, so what are we seeing for questions? Okay. The thing is, I want to be working, Dave, while I'm answering questions. Okay, I have to take my glasses off to read this. Do you recommend starting out, oh, we did that one already, with one design and using that exclusively? I do recommend doing the same design over at least a whole quilt or two to get really comfortable in it. Do you think you get longer stitches? So you, and I assume you mean by taking the stitch regulator off. I don't think so. I think that if you're finding you're getting longer stitches, you might want to speed up your stitch regulator. If that's your comfortable movement, then if you up the percentage, up the speed at which the needle is going, you'll get overall shorter stitches. So I'm aiming for them to look like the 12 stitches per inch that I began with. Jana, wavy borders are hard to lie flat. How do you deal with wavy borders? Well, I have several things. And they're going to be partial answers because I'll let you in on a little secret. One of the bonus modules in my masterclass is how to work with problem quilts, because I quilt for clients, and because it's fabric and it's flexible, it's malleable, right? The majority of quilts that come across Lucy's rails have some sort of thing that needs a little bit of tweaking. And wavy borders is certainly one of them, or the reverse, which is tight borders and a wavy center. Both of those things are things I see super commonly. So one of the things that I do is when I'm basting my top initially to lay it, kind of lost my train of thought there, but when I'm initially floating my top, if there is quite a bit of excess, I will smooth that out and distribute it, if you will, and I will pin those areas in place. And then when I'm doing my basting, I'll man the machine with my right hand and I'll manipulate the fabric with my left hand. Just by, for example, putting weight on it on one side or the other, you can pull in quite a bit of that excess. And I do have some other tips for if you get severely wavy borders, but for most quilts, just distributing and pinning that excess fabric and then manipulating it with your hands, you can get it under the needle. Linda, I also struggle with backing myself into a corner and then panicking. Well, another tip, and this is in my class in more detail, but I'll tell you the basis of it now, and you'll see it as I'm quilting. I work across my quilt top in a kind of diagonal fashion so that I never get an awkward corner at the top that I can't get back to, if that makes sense. So watch as I'm working my way down the quilt. I will pretty much work in a diagonal fashion, whether I'm going left to right or right to left. One more. Sheila, when you get to the edges, do you do partial motifs or try just to fill empty spaces with curves, etc.? All of the above. For any design that I do, I try to have in my back pocket some type of partial motif or smaller complementary motif that I can tuck into the awkward corners. And again, you'll see that as I'm quilting. I'll do the odd little shape that just has one plume instead of the entire kind of flower shape. That's how I deal with the edge. Okay, Janet, I want to make that quilt so you can quilt it. Go for it, Janet. Janet is my friend, so I invite her to do that. Excuse me while I grab a tissue. You guys, I'm sorry for that. I thought of it halfway through the sniffle. Mute the mic. Anyway, I apologize. But you know, I said it was going to be real, didn't I? Put the glasses back on. So I'm using, for some of you this may be different, but I've done a bajillion quilts, right? So you're just seeing me work kind of at my level of comfort. I'm not measuring necessarily the width of my quilt. Sometimes I do, but in this case I'm not. It's fairly flat, and I'm just using my piecing as a visual aid to keeping it straight. and I think it's going to be satisfactory. And these are magnetic bars that I put on the front to keep the quilt from pulling up as I'm stitching across it. It's a super easy way without having to roll that top onto another roller. Get everything nice and flat and smooth. I think I went just a little too far forward. I'm going to back up about 2 inches. I see some areas there I'm going to have a little trouble reaching. Okay, we're in business. For the one that asked about the wavy top, this is one of the things that I do. Watch my hands, and I'm kind of pulling behind the needle. It's already stitched, but you can visibly see it's pulling in. So even though my border is flat, if I did not put some tension on that, it would cause it to push forward and wrinkle. So it's just kind of a preventive measure. But it'll make that border stay nice and flat. Usually I have a cup up here for my threads, so if you see me doing that, that's just reflex. One of my favorite low-cost tools is a Rolo cup stuck to the top of my machine for a thread depository. Again, if this is something you're a little bit new to, I recommend marking the front of your quilting area. So determine how far forward you can quilt. If it's a dark quilt, you could put a chalk line there if you want to. Here's my method of choice. I'll show you this. One of my favorite marking tools is painter's tape. So I'll do that just so you can see it. Because it's bright blue or green, as the case may be, it catches your eye, and it's just a visual reminder. That's my perimeter. I use this in lots of ways for visual aids, if you will, in my quilting. So you just saw there another option for dealing with the edge is to just pretend like your quilted design goes completely off. And if you need to, use some kind of marking tool and actually draw where it would fall. And then you can kind of, I suppose you could actually even quilt right off the edge. It will get trimmed off later. Because I have quilted this design so often, I could kind of visualize in my mind how to lop that off. But that's another way to deal with coming to the perimeter of your quilt. So maybe while I'm working steadily, Dave can take a minute to make sure you've got the camera view that shows you kind of the best picture of the quilting as texture. And I hope you're getting a sense for kind of why I love edge to edge so much. It takes a back row seat to the piecing. It lets the piecing and the fabrics be what shines. It just adds a texture. And the more even I can keep that, the less distracting it is to the eye. Because in general, I don't want my quilting to be the first thing that the viewer sees. I want it to complement the quilt, but not run it over, so to speak. So am I that far over? Did it just catch on the... So I can interrupt our streaming? Sorry about that, folks. So you can see what an obvious visual aid my blue painter's tape is. So I'm just going to make sure I don't go below it, and I'm just going to travel over to my next more open area. My thread is ivory. I was just coming to that. Great minds must think alike. I am actually using today another tool. So I just came to the end of a bobbin, by the way, so that's why I'm pausing. And you can't really see in the light, I choose to undo my stitching a little bit because there was no tension on that bobbin thread the last 2 inches or so. And I don't bury my threads when I'm doing edge to edge work. So I like to pause in a corner, if you can see that, so that I can put my 3 or 4 or 5 locking stitches relatively invisibly in a corner. So all that said, I have 60 weight glide thread in the top. I couldn't tell you the thread number off the top of my head, but it's just a slightly off white. And I have eggshell isocord 40 weight in the bottom. This is just my personal experience. My machine does not like 60 weight thread in the bobbin, so I always use my 40 in the bottom. I did run out of bobbin thread. I probably will once or twice more before it's finished. If you're interested, I did put a little, 4 or 5 minute video clip on Facebook the other night with my rationale for thread choices. Again, which has to do largely with my philosophy of making the quilting be complementary, but not the first thing you see. And I don't know if you can see in the camera, my backing is a black and white print. So I just do a few lock stitches wherever I have a new thread starting. Super simple. And I'm going to go back to my non-stitch regulated. I do prefer that. So just a reminder, be thinking of the hurdle that's keeping you from free motion or edge-to-edge quilting freehand like this? And type that into the comments, and we'll review some of those. I don't, maybe I'm just living sheltered, but I don't know that many quilters that enjoy just quilting freehand like this. Most will tend to have either a pantograph or digital designs, depending on their computer, and feel like they can't just branch out on their own. And so my goal with these live sessions, and especially with my masterclass, is to show how within the reach of every quilter it is to quilt entirely free motion like this, and entirely without pre-marking or having a pattern drawn out for you. And I think for me, my largest hurdle early on was thinking, well, you have to be able to draw, don't you, in order to quilt like this? And honestly, I can't sketch my way out of a paper sack. So to me, that seemed insurmountable, But over time, I have come to learn that being able to draw is not critical. There's endless sources of designs, whether it's fabric, which is an obvious inspiration, or wallpaper, or hotel carpets, or kids' coloring books. There's endless inspiration for designs. What's more important is things like developing your peripheral vision so that you can see and plan where to quilt next and move smoothly around the quilt. Developing fine control, which is exactly the same eye-hand coordination that handwriting is. So in fact, in some of my classes, I link quilting practice to the same types of drills that we did way back when in handwriting classes, because it's exactly the same skill. And for much the same reason, it will be unique to you. Your quilting will be unique to you, just like your handwriting is. Everyone quilts feathers a little differently than the next quilter. Nevertheless, it can be learned, whether it's the feather or whether it's making perfect circles or figure eights. They can be learned. And I think I've developed some good ways to practice, to do focused and directed practice that really helps improve that skill and control. We are doodling with a 40 or 50 pound pencil, right? So that's really important, is that you learn that careful muscular control. So those things I feel like are much more important than actually being an artist. And then too, our medium is fabric, and it is flexible and it moves, and we have to know the ways to deal with that, right? To produce a good result at the end, whether or not the pattern is elaborate or fancy of our quilting. We want a quilt at the end that lays flat. We want to be able to choose quilting that complements the quilt. And so there's lots and lots of elements to freehand quilting that have nothing to do with necessarily raw talent as an artist. So I hope that's encouraging to someone. That was my hurdle, and I think I have got myself over that one. I think my biggest hurdle against doing live quilting episodes like this was the thought that I wouldn't be able to talk and quilt at the same time. And as you see, I have no trouble talking. Dave's probably sitting over there laughing. I never have any trouble talking. That's just me. And I have a broken thread. Okay, so while I fix my thread, I will take some questions. Margie, what design to quilt? Oh boy, that's a fun one. I think my biggest tip for that one would be to take your cues from, or at least to start your thought process from what is the quilt for? What or whom? So, if it's for a small boy, for example, you might want to quilt loop-de-loops like an airplane would make. If it's for a little girl that loves wearing, pink frilly dresses, well, then you definitely might want something floral or, curlicue, right? So that's the first place I start narrowing down my designs is who is it for? How elaborate do I want to go? Is it a wedding gift and I want it to be utterly gorgeous? Or is it for a high school grad and they're going to drag it off to college and, who knows how it will get treated, right? That influences my choice of how complicated a design I do, how intricate. Wow, my thread really shredded. Do I wind my own bobbins? I do. And my reasoning is this. To start with, I use isocord thread most. I have Glide on today, but I typically use isocord thread because they have over 300 colors, and I love that choice of selection of colors. So then on the heels of that, when you buy pre-wound bobbins, you're really limited as to color. And I very much like to match my top and bottom thread or come very close to it. They might only be a shade or two apart. So I prefer to have the choice of all the colors. That is personal preference. Also probably for reasons of economy. If you follow me at all, you'll know I'm driven a great deal by my frugal soul. And so I'm always looking for lower cost solutions. And I find I do have a freestanding, where's the camera? I do have a freestanding bobbin winder, but I find that if I just set one bobbin to winding while I quilt, there comes the camera. So that's what I'm actually doing now. When I did my last bobbin change, I just quickly set up the next bobbin to wind. And when I need the next one, it's just a matter of changing it. So all I'm losing is that like 2 seconds of loading the bobbin, right? It's all the time it takes. Another question. Sheila, I've been doing pantos for so long that I know what my finished product is going to be, and also since I'm following lines, the design lines are consistent. When I try to freehand, I lose that perfect motif look and it appears as a child's drawing. I hear you, Sheila. But be realistic about it. Like think of my handwriting analogy again. A first grader has to start somewhere with practicing the shapes until they get smooth and they start to do finer and more precise work. I think that quilting is the same way. And if you want to get competent in free motion quilting, all it takes is practice, exactly like a kid learning handwriting. My opinion, bet. I did say I'm an advocate for this style of freehand quilting, so you'll never hear me trash talking it. But I'm pretty convinced that it is just like calligraphy, just like patisserie baking. It is just a thing that practice will make come more naturally, and very much like handwriting. Now, where am I in terms of my design? I don't know, Sheila and others on here, if you do custom quilting at all, but I also find that doing this type of freehand quilting, I will sometimes develop my designs specifically so that they give me practice in things like forming round bubbles. Like I do lots of sort of loop-de-loop designs, and when I'm quilting them, I'm not just whipping out the loopy loops. I am literally practicing making my plump round circles, right? So I use this type of quilting to practice my control and my movements. And that comes into play then when I get into higher end custom quilting. That skill is then in my muscle memory, in my shoulders. I'm not sure where all it resides, but I find that it's there when I need it. And by focusing my practice on making exactly the shape I want, and not just winging it, that really helps me. I'll just add in here too, one of the other bonus modules that I'm adding in my masterclass is basically a stitch tension and stitch formation troubleshooting. And kind of what I mean by that is, I think all of us have experienced what I did this morning, thread breakage. And sometimes you will just have your thread break for no reason you can determine, right? And you'll spend half a day practically in tears, trying this, trying that, trying the other thing, just trying to figure out what in the world is causing that problem, right? So what I've done is try to accumulate. They're not original ideas. I've just tried to pull together in one place all the tips that I've ever heard, all the things to check for and look for that could be causing that problem. Because I've been there. I totally know how frustrating that can be, to not know why you've got a funny loop on the back of your quilt. But there always is a reason. It's just a matter of going through the possible causes one after another till you hit upon the right one. So I felt like that would be a helpful bonus module for many quilters. It doesn't obviously directly relate to freehand quilting, but it comes into play if you're producing a lot of quilts. Alrighty, we have reached the end again. So while I advance the quilt, let me know, are you finding this helpful? Is it, as I hoped it would be, helpful to just see something being done in real time with no sort of steps edited out or dressed up? This is how it actually works in my studio. Just going to hang my little tape on the side there. You guys can't see, but I can. I've only got about 7 or 8 inches of the quilt left hanging over my bar, so I'm just doing a short pass this time, knowing that I have to do one more. So I feel like that will come together well. Sorry, Dave? Question. Linda, do you ever have difficulty seeing the thread of the areas you have already quilted? Oh, yes, I do. I mean, today I'm not particularly, you might be on camera, but if you have dark fabrics or if you have really busy prints, yes. Now, I'm lucky with my new machine. It has both the, I have it unlit at the moment, like the headlight, so to speak, or you can have the white light on or the black light. So I play around with those. Every so often the black light will help with that visibility. Otherwise, if it's a really hard quilt, I try and do it in daylight. I find that artificial light is more difficult too, just my experience. So, but I'll be honest too, I think I'm a careful quilter, but I'm not a perfectionist. So, I mean, the odd time I've gone over the edge of the last design that I did, and I don't usually go back and undo that unless it's glaring. But I mean, look how busy my backing is on here, right? And fairly busy prints too. If that were to happen to me, I would just keep on going. I wouldn't worry about it too much. I'm on regulated. I'm going to tuck my trusty blue guideline back on. That just keeps me from bumping up hard against that rail and getting a funny, awkward square motif. So I'm just, oh. Okay. Do you want to flip the cord there? We're just adjusting cords here a minute. I need to go over a bit more. I'm just going to raise my back rail a little bit. It's getting tight against Lucy. There. Just hike it up an inch or so. And we're good to go. You've probably noticed that I'm alternating which side I quilt from, even though I have to break thread from my basting. It just helps keep my motifs from all pointing in the same direction and looking like they've been caught in a stiff wind, right? So I try and do that with most of my edge-to-edge work. When it's straight lines, as I did yesterday, it doesn't matter nearly as much. But when it's any kind of motif, you don't want them to look like they're all going the same direction. So one way to avoid that is sometimes quilting left to right and sometimes right to left. Plus, it's good practice. Let's go back to our constant mode. My blue tape is helping me out here. I know exactly how far I can go. Okay, so I forgot to ask, what was their feedback, Dave, on whether or not this is being helpful? Was there feedback on whether or not this is being helpful to see this worked out in real time? Yeah, I hope so. I know when I was beginning, that was just always a question to me. Like, how do I actually load the quilt? And then what do I do next? And then what do I do next? So I hope that this is helpful to be seeing this. And I'm curious, Dave, are you doing any of my poll questions?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'd like to hear the answers. I guess you can't put them on screen. Okay. Very good. Okay, I'll keep quilting. I'm going to give you another quilting tip that you might not expect, but that I find to be very important, only I can't show you. To me, it is really critical how I have my feet placed, especially if you're doing a design that is all round and doesn't have corners and you can't easily pause and reposition your feet. It's important how your weight is distributed, because at some point you do have to move them, right? Because you're moving across the front of the quilt top. So my tip is, think about this a few times and move around in back of your machine. I tend to always have my weight on my hind leg, so to speak. I mean, I know that I only have two beside each other, but if you know what I mean. The foot that's going to be moving in front of me, in this case to my left, where I'm standing right now, I do not have my weight on that foot. I have it on the other foot, so that I can move my left foot forward and it won't joggle my balance. That too I found to be so challenging early on. You know, for example, think you're doing a wavy line entirely across the quilt and you don't want to stop at all. And you don't want to wobble either. Well, that's how you do it. You keep that weight on your back leg all the time so that you can move smoothly. And if you guys watch me for a while, I bet you won't be able to tell, hopefully, when I shift feet. And that all just has to do with weight distribution. So just pay attention to it a few times, but really try. Keep that weight on your back leg and have the front ready to move. And that way you never have to stop to shift yourself. Notice too, when I am quilting up close to my blue perimeter line, that I try to avoid having an exact straight line, you know, of the ending of my motifs, right? I don't want the viewer of the quilt to be able to tell at a glance where my rows, my passes were. I want them to go together seamlessly. So when you're quilting a pantograph or you have a digital design, that is usually built into those designs, that they nest a little bit. So you want to do the same thing with your free motion quilting. You want to keep that bottom edge kind of wavy and then nest the next pass up against it so it all looks seamless. if you are really enjoying this quilt along, so to speak, today, I invite you to go to my website and sign up for my newsletter. In there, I will always put notifications when I'm doing a live event like this, or even when a class is coming up, whether it's a large one like this Masterclass or just a small, 90-minute session, or when I'm teaching and quilting shows, those sorts of things. And my newsletter too, if you're interested, usually has the most recent projects that I've been working on. And, my style is kind of a teaching style, so I'll often give the measurements I used or things that I learned in the course of that project. That's the type of newsletter that I send out, and generally it's every second week, so I certainly will not bombard you with material. I'm too busy quilting. I don't have time to type that many newsletters. I'd rather be quilting. But nevertheless, it is the place where I try to update my followers with whatever I'm currently doing, if there's something they might be interested in. And I believe I mentioned with the Masterclass, if you do want to see exactly what is involved in it in terms of what the topics are, and also, how many live and interactive sessions and the time frame that it's set up for, and those sorts of things. From time to time, Dave's got a link going across the screen to my website. I have a page there for the Masterclass, and I also have a page for my store. But the page for the Masterclass has a direct link to what I call the syllabus, but basically the curriculum. So it breaks it down by module and kind of gives the goals, the expectations of what you'll come away with at the end of it. No surprises there. I don't know if you could see on camera the door just opening behind me. I left my door unlatched because I have a studio buddy. His name is Berlioz. He's a black cat. We just call him B. But he's very attached to me. And if I close the door, he will just sit outside and scratch at it, and you would all get to listen to that. So I left the door open for him, and I just saw out of the corner of my eye he came in to see what we're up to. So he was kind of my reason behind the pet poll question. I know so many crafters, but quilt makers in particular, have someone who keeps them company in their studio. Lots of us post pictures of our little assistants or troublemakers, depending on how you want to look at it. I'm kind of curious too, with all the things that were different in 2020. Did you guys, as crafters and quilt makers, find that you had more time to devote to your craft or less time? I was kind of a homebody even before COVID came along, so that did not change drastically for me. But I'm curious how that affected your time that you could devote to crafts. You can see there I just did a partial motif. Fit in that corner. And here I'm going to do one that's going to run right off the edge. echo out to the perimeter. One more swirl. And we're on to the last pass. Okay, let us take some questions. Yes. Don't need the tape anymore. See if we can make a basket. No, I'll never make the NBA. That's a fact. Okay, let's see the questions. Oh, still coming. Julia, roughly how large are your swirls and feather petals? Hard to determine from video. The motifs from side to side are a little smaller than my hand. So perhaps 4 to 5 inches from side to side. Each petal is about an inch wide, maybe an inch and a quarter or inch and a half long. I will post some photographs after this is over on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll try and put some like scissors and spools of thread in the picture so that you can judge the scale of it a little bit. Okay, let's hear what my poles are doing. I cannot read the answers, no.
Cat, 13%. The dog at 25.
And the pet rock at 63. Okay, you guys are hilarious. I totally thought that was really a quilter thing, is to have a pet, but more people have pet rocks. Something they do not have to clean up hair after.
Next one. What is your favorite part of making the quilt?
Piecing,
One is piecing at
67.
7, then the quilting. 0.
0 at handwork. Well, I do have to keep in mind when I ask this question, I'm talking to a machine quilting audience, probably. It's kind of amazing how many quilting friends I have who love either English paper piecing or hand quilting, or, I mean, I like those things too, but they're such a teeny tiny percentage of what I do. I don't know. Your machine of choice. Long arm, 90. That's not surprising. Mid arm, 10. No domestics here today.
I made my own question up.
Why do you quilt?
For family or friends.
Yep.
0% for fun for myself.
Yep.
38 for business. Is a quarter, and for therapy is 38.
Therapy. I mean, quilting is my therapy. Seriously, I mean, I'm no scientist, but studies have certainly been done about the enormous health benefits and mental health benefits of doing something that you love. And it is cheaper than paying a therapist. So why not?
Linda.
I do love hand applique, but machine quilting more. Good for you. I am not a hand appliquer. I am currently trying my hand at English paper piecing. That is a brand new skill to me. But I'm going to give it a whirl. I'm going to back up just a little. That's a long ways away from me. Oh, don't. You'll get dizzy. All right. So once again, if my quilt had any crookedness or wonkiness, I would be pinning this edge to secure it in place. My pressing is not real great under there. Let's get that straight. This one's pretty flat. So I'm just going to put a couple pins in it to make sure it stays straight. And I can use my channel lock, of course, to keep a perfectly straight edge on it. But I think it's pretty accurate. Just to make sure everything stays put. This is probably not news to you, but I use corsage pins, and I go through a lot of them. But they're sturdy enough to not bend when you're trying to pin through so many layers. So once again, I will put my little horizontal channel lock on. Come a little bit further forward. So I get a really nice straight edge. And once again, can you see this? I'm putting tension. Dave's going to change cameras. You'll see as I go along. I'm putting a little tension behind my machine where it has already stitched. If I didn't, this would continue to press forward. So just that little bit of tension where it has already stitched keeps it flat and smooth. I'm not a 1/4 inch from the edge, but you know, it's okay. As long as it holds securely, I'll sew that 1/4 inch seam when I put my binding on there. And if my border was a little wonky, I'd just be pulling that much harder on this, and that's how I would ease in that little bit of excess. And I would have put in more pins so that I knew how much excess to ease in, if that makes sense. I mean, if a quilt's really bad, I'll sometimes pin every inch. Just whatever it takes to get that fabric eased in there. Yeah, I'm really close to that edge, aren't I? Hooey! I'm just going to release my horizontal channel lock and move up just a hair. There we are. And again, you can just see how I can manipulate this a little bit, right? I can move it left, or I can push it right. I can pull it back this way if there's excess in here. So I'm just using my left hand to manipulate the fabric if I need to. And there we are. And you notice I did sew over the pins, which I'm sure most quilters will tell you is a no-no. I find I've never broken a pin or a needle doing it. I find if I do it slowly, I've never had a problem, but that's just me. I am going to go back to the other side though, so I'm quilting my alternate direction. And you know what? It feels like I ran out of bobbin thread right there at the edge. You guys won't believe this, but look at. Oh, sorry. I could have put it under the close camera. No, it's okay. Look at this. I ran out of bobbin right at the edge of that basting bobbin thread. So let me grab another one. Oh, we call it bobbin chicken. I'm sure all these quilters are aware of it, but it's when you're, you know, racing. What comes first, the end of the quilt or the end of the thread? Bobbin chicken. Okay, last pass. We're making progress. Oh, I'm going to take my regulating off again. while I do this last pass, why don't we chat a minute about ways that you could change up this design. So what you're keeping the same is kind of the plume or feather shape so that you can carry it through from design to design and get really familiar with it. But what things could you change? Well, you could certainly change that spiral in the middle. It could be a very simple hook. It could even be a round circle if you wanted to. We mentioned earlier that you could, I don't want to demonstrate because it will kind of mess up the aesthetics of my quilt, but you could certainly make longer, thinner plumes. Another easy one is you could echo or not, right? I'm choosing to echo, although perhaps you've noticed as I'm quilting that the odd time I'm coming out of a plume motif not on the side I want to be on, and so I will choose either not to echo it at all or to echo it twice. Either one of those is a perfectly fine option. But you could choose to not use echoes, and that just gives a little bit different look than when it does have the echoes, right? And certainly you can mess with scale. It will go faster. I think about 50% bigger than this is about as big as you want to go before you start getting large spaces where those plumes are. My opinion, of course. But you can definitely do this finer. I've done that lots of times, done it quite tiny, like a quarter this size, and used it as a fill in areas of custom quilting. So that's an option. So lots of ways that you can make this your own, or that you can just change it so that every quilt looks a little bit different, right? Without having to learn a whole new design. You're still really comfortable doing these plumes, for example, but you know, you've decided to just do a simple hook inside them instead of the spiral. It just changes up the look a little bit. This little hook right there is another common one that I do in a tight space, is just a partial feather shape. Hopefully you could see that on the black fabric. I do try with every freehand design to have, before I launch into the quilting, to kind of already have planned out smaller or complementary bits that I can tuck into tight corners, or that I give me a way to travel if I need to be in a different area than where I in fact am. I think that's probably the most common thing that I hear from people that are launching into freehand quilting is, you know, I get myself painted into a corner, how in the world do I get out? So that's one of my suggestions. You know, be aware of already a motif that you can tuck into odd corners. Secondly, plan ahead, you know, what your movement across the quilt top will be. And thirdly, if you need to, pause at any one of these corners, if you will. It's very easy, without affecting the smoothness of the design at all, to just pause and think ahead a little bit. You know, use your finger and trace out, you know, if I do this, where am I going to end up? If I start my motif from right to left, where will that take me? If I instead start it from left to right, you know, my spiral, for example, where would that end me up? And just think that through. Where would you end up? And it's kind of difficult for me to show you that because I've done this design so much that it's second nature to me. But I generally know going into it which way I'm going to come out of it, right? And I, on purpose, go in one way or the other way, knowing how I want to come out of it, if that makes sense. So that immediacy, if you will, comes with practice. But you can always just pause and think that through. I'll give you one more idea if you're looking for quilting designs, or if you want to get a bit of a preview for some of the designs that I'll be teaching in the masterclass. I have a Pinterest account also called Stitched by Susan, and I have a board called My Gallery Edge to Edge. And in there I put quite a lot of pictures of these types of quilts that have edge to edge designs. And you'll see multiple pictures sometimes of the same design because it looks very different when it's done on different fabrics or done to a different scale. But you're always welcome to go there for ideas. None of these designs are copyrighted or anything like that by me, so you are welcome to use them. I don't know if you saw there, I had a little wobble and looped over an earlier line of stitching, and you know what? That does not bother me at all. You're going to see lots of partial motifs as we work our way across the bottom of the quilt here. I just wing it and I just make them fit as best I can. And I feel like overall, as long as it's similar closeness of quilting, it's just going to provide texture. You're getting a close-up look at it now, but most people looking at the whole finished quilt will never notice, you know, if there's a 1 plume motif or a 5 plume motif. Here's another little hook, just tucking it in there, just a partial one. You can see there, I'm not sure how much of this whole surface you can see, but I kind of worked myself into a funny corner there. You saw that I was further right on the quilt at the bottom than I was in the middle. And my answer to that was not to panic. I just echoed some of the motifs till I got back to the area that I saw I needed to fill in. And again, that will just fall under the heading of texture when it's all done. That will not at all look like an oops. I've kind of done it again. I'm way further at the bottom of the quilt than I am up there in the middle, so I'm going to echo my way back up there again. So there's really no corner you can't get yourself out of. A good echo is just your friend. Well, we're coming down the home stretch, so if you have any more burning questions, now's the time. So in case we have any people that have recently come in, I'll give one more little introduction to my upcoming Masterclass. It launches in January, and it's coming out in 6 modules. They'll be released 1 per week. However, you can go through them at your own pace. They will be accessible to you via password for as long as you want them. So you can go through them at your own pace. You can pick and choose among the designs, however it suits you. But for the duration of that 6 weeks, plus 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, I'll be scheduling some interactive sessions. So whether it's a live on Facebook, where you can all get in the same room with me and you can actually be working on your machines and we can work through some designs together, or whether it's, I'm going to call them office hours, when I'm in the private Facebook group and I'll be available those times of day to answer your questions in real time. So there will be all those types of interaction. So that's a big component of the class, is you kind of have access to me to help you resolve any issues that you're bumping up against with your quilting. So if you want any more information on that, on my website, I think Dave's got the links scrolling across the screen, but for sure on my website I have a page for the Freehand Masterclass, and linked to that is the syllabus with all the different modules and what the topics are and kind of what your expectations can be that you can go away from this class having learned or mastered. And by all means, feel free to reach out to me on social media or email. I will answer your questions for sure. And the questions that have been asked throughout the class today, though I've answered them verbally, I'm going to go back in as well and type them so it's easier for you to refer to them, and also for people who watch after the fact. The answers will be right there alongside the questions, so hope that's helpful to you too. Have I mentioned I love freehand quilting? This is truly my favorite. My very, very favorite. I just love unloading a quilt that's been quilted like this, shaking it out, and looking at all that gorgeous texture. So rewarding to have clients come in and just be amazed at how the quilting, you know, though I aim for it to take a back seat, as I've said, and to be complimentary and not the star of the show, yet the quilting is what makes it a quilt, right? Before that, it's just a collection of fabric, but somehow that layer of texture just pulls it all together, and it's so rewarding to have a client come in and just be wowed by how it all comes together. Once again, I'm just echoing into a corner that I see that I need to fill. Super easy. We're nearing the end. So I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret. I have never done a pantograph. So I actually can't speak from experience and say how much time it takes to load them and plan them. I've been to classes about them, so I've seen others doing it. But early on, I found that I really loved just the almost hypnotic rhythm of just doing the quilting by myself, and I just love having that level of control over the quilting and the individuality of it. So I have always done my edge-to-edge quilting freehand. Now, with this Lucy, who I'm quilting on now, I actually just acquired it a few weeks ago. So I do now have a tablet, and I'd have the option of digital edge-to-edge designs. And I've done, I think, 3, Dave, in 3 months' time. So you can see that's not a big thing on my horizon either. My reason for doing that, if you wonder why on earth I bought the machine then, was I would like to digitize in the future some of my designs and make them available to other quilters. So that was kind of my reasoning. I don't think that that will ever be my go-to way of quilting, but it does have its purpose and its place, for sure. Go back in and fill that odd little corner in. Just like that. And we are finished. Whew, that was a marathon. Okay. What's easier, if I go right, Dave, with my machine? Probably. Right, but just in terms of getting out of the way. So I'm going to unload this for you so that I can shake it out a little bit and show you the texture. But as I mentioned, I will post some photographs today on Instagram and Facebook so you can have a look at it, and I'll put a few things in the picture for scale.
One question you answer now, or maybe?
I'll just get this unrolled and then I'll answer it now. Okay, I'll take it now. Sheila, I notice you don't check tension on the sides after changing bobbins. I thought that was practically mandatory. Can you talk about that? Well, to me, that's a bit individualized. I know my machine pretty good, and I do have a TOA tension gauge, and I do check it on the TOA gauge. So I find for my machine that if I keep my TOA set, and I tend to use the same thread always in the bobbins, as I mentioned earlier, the isocord thread. I'm not changing thread weights or styles or fiber content, right? I find that it works pretty good. It is a good point though, Sheila. I tend to not necessarily stitch on the side, but maybe in the basting line, and I did this a few times, I just didn't stop and talk about it. I'll run my fingernail underneath, because if that top thread is too loose, I will feel the eyelashing, the railroading, even if it's just a little bit underneath. And of course I can see on top if it's happening on top. So for me, that's enough of a check. Tension is not usually an issue. Part of that probably just comes with experience too, right? Like I know what my stitch should look like on the top. And if there's a little bobble, like a little gnat has happened on the bottom, I'll see that happening from the top, and I'll just stop stitching and go and look, because I'll know. I can even see my thread feeding through my little pigtails at the front. If that bobbles, I'll know something has gone wrong, right? So that just comes too with a bit of experience. But that's a really great question. Certainly, if you're having any difficulty with, doing a pass and finding that it has bad tension, it's definitely worth spending the time to check it beforehand. All right. Let's see what's the best way to show this. Over like that, perhaps? Whoops, sorry about that. Well, I'll hold it up also. I don't know that you can really see the texture on it in these shots very well, so I'll post pictures. Meantime, I will be back tomorrow and Thursday as well at 9 o'clock PST doing a similar thing. I've already got my quilt planned for tomorrow, but if there was a particular design you wanted to see, like you see something on my Pinterest board or in recent blog posts or whatever, and you'd like to see a particular design, chime in on that on any of my social media pages. I'm Stitched by Susan, Facebook, Instagram, all those places. And I'll make a plan for Thursday because I don't have that one planned out yet necessarily. So yeah, and again, if you know people who are novices at free motion quilting, at freehanding like this, by all means invite them. The more the merrier. I'm happy, as you see, to answer questions and chat about what I do and what my reasons are for doing things. And yeah, I thank you very much for coming, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a great day.